Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. The moment that shattered Steffy Forrester's world unfolded with a cruelty no mother could ever prepare for, and as the chilling realization set in that her baby had been stolen, the air itself seemed to collapse around her, turning breath into agony and time into something unrecognizable, because nothing, not her strength, not her resilience, not the countless battles she had survived before, could have prepared her for the primal terror of reaching for her child and finding nothing but emptiness, a silence so loud it screamed through her soul, and in that instant the unthinkable became real. Steffy's baby was gone, kidnapped in a twist so devastating that even longtime viewers of chaos and heartbreak were left stunned, their hearts pounding as Steffy's scream echoed through the room, a raw, animal sound born not of dialogue but of instinct, of a mother's deepest fear made flesh. And Jacqueline MacInnes would deliver this moment with such harrowing authenticity that it felt less like acting and more like a confession torn from the deepest chambers of grief, her eyes wide with disbelief, her hands shaking as if her body itself refused to accept what her mind was beginning to comprehend, and as she staggered through the nursery, her nursery, every soft blanket and innocent toy became a cruel reminder of what had been stolen, not just a child but a future, a sense of safety. A belief that love alone could protect what mattered most, and the camera lingered mercilessly on her face as tears spilled freely, unglamorous and uncontrolled, her voice breaking as she whispered her baby's name again and again as if calling into the void might somehow reverse the horror. And this was the moment fans would later describe as the scene that left them sobbing, because it stripped away all artifice and left only a mother in free fall, and the confession that followed, Steffy's tearful, shattered admission that she had failed to protect her child, cut even deeper, because it was not spoken aloud to another character but etched across her expression, every flicker of guilt, panic, and self-blame visible as she collapsed to the floor, clutching the crib as though holding onto it could anchor her to sanity. And this was no ordinary plot twist, no temporary peril designed for shock value, but a storyline that dared to explore the most intimate nightmare imaginable, forcing viewers to confront the vulnerability beneath Steffy's fierce exterior, reminding everyone that strength does not make one immune to devastation. And as the news spread and the weight of the crime settled in, the chilling implications became impossible to ignore. Someone had watched, someone had planned, someone had taken advantage of a moment of trust or distraction, and the question of who could commit such an act added a sinister undercurrent to Steffy's already unbearable grief. But even as suspicion and fear swirled, the emotional core remained fixed on Steffy herself, on the way her body trembled when authorities spoke in measured tones that felt grotesquely inadequate, on the way her eyes darted toward every doorway as if expecting her baby to be returned by sheer willpower, and Jacqueline MacInnes Wood's performance elevated every second, her portrayal so visceral that fans didn't just watch Steffy suffer, they felt it in their own chests, many admitting later that they had to look away, that the realism was almost too much, because this was a mother's cry, not scripted sorrow but a shared human terror. And what made the moment even more devastating was its suddenness, the way no one saw this coming, the way the story had lulled viewers into a sense of fragile happiness before ripping it away without warning, mirroring real life's cruelty in a way soaps rarely dare, and in doing so the show crossed a line into something profoundly unsettling yet undeniably powerful, because it forced empathy, it forced reflection, it forced viewers to sit with discomfort rather than resolve it neatly. And as Steffy's world continued to unravel, every interaction became haunted by absence, every conversation punctuated by what was not there, and her once commanding presence gave way to a fragile desperation that revealed the depth of her love, the magnitude of her loss, and the unbearable weight of not knowing whether her baby was safe, afraid, or crying for her. And the image of Steffy standing frozen, clutching her phone as it rang with false alarms and dead ends, became emblematic of the storyline's emotional power, because it captured that uniquely torturous space between hope and despair where time stretches endlessly and every second feels like a betrayal. And Jacqueline MacInnes Wood's tears, unfiltered, relentless, served not as spectacle but as testimony, a reminder of why this character has endured and why this moment resonated so deeply, because it exposed the raw truth that beneath every glamorous setting and dramatic rivalry lies something far more universal, the fear of losing what we love most. And as fans flooded social media with reactions, many described feeling shaken, heartbroken, even haunted by the scene, praising the show for its bravery and the actress for her fearless commitment. noting that this was not just a plot twist but a turning point, one that would forever alter Steffi's trajectory, because even if her baby were to be found, the innocence was gone, replaced by a scar that would never fully heal, and that is what made this kidnapping so chilling, so unforgettable, because it was not resolved within the comfort of a single episode but lingered like a shadow, reminding viewers that some moments change us irrevocably, and in the end, what made Steffi's baby's kidnapping resonate was not the mystery of who did it or how it would be solved, but the honesty of a mother's devastation, the courage of a performance that refused to soften the blow, and the shared silence of an audience left reeling, sobbing, and unable to forget the image of Steffi Forrester, strong, defiant Steffi, brought to her knees by the one thing no one can fight, the loss of a child, making this storyline not just another dramatic chapter but one of the most emotionally searing moments the show has ever dared to tell. As the immediate shock of the kidnapping began to give way to a more suffocating, relentless horror, Steffi Forrester found herself trapped in a nightmare that refused to fade with daylight, because every passing minute without her baby became a living accusation, a reminder that somewhere beyond her reach her child was enduring the unknown, and Jacqueline MacInnes would portray this slow-burning descent with devastating precision, showing how trauma does not explode once and disappear but instead seeps into every thought, every breath, every fragile attempt at normalcy, and as Steffi moved through the house that once felt like a sanctuary, the silence pressed down on her chest until it felt impossible to breathe, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a cruel echo of what was missing, and she wandered aimlessly from room to room, touching the baby's clothes, inhaling the faint scent still clinging to the blankets, clinging to these remnants as though they were lifelines, tethering her to hope, even as doubt gnawed relentlessly at the edges of her mind, and the guilt, sharp, unrelenting, began to take root, because mothers are conditioned to believe they should anticipate every danger, prevent every harm, and Steffi was no exception, her thoughts spiraling endlessly as she replayed the moments leading up to the kidnapping, searching desperately for the instant where she might have made a different choice, trusted the wrong person, looked away for 1 second too long, and the cruelty of that self-interrogation was made all the more unbearable by the knowledge that answers offered no comfort, because the past could not be rewritten and the present was an abyss of uncertainty, and when she finally allowed herself to speak, to voice the terror clawing its way out of her chest, it came not as eloquent dialogue but as broken fragments, pleas, accusations, prayers, each word trembling as though it might shatter under the weight of what it carried, and Jacqueline MacInnes Wood's delivery was so painfully restrained at times that it felt like watching someone hold themselves together with sheer willpower, her eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, her posture rigid as if collapsing would mean never getting back up, and this restraint made the moments when she did break all the more devastating, because when Steffi finally gave in to sobs that racked her entire body, it felt less like an emotional beat and more like a release of pressure that had been building since the moment her baby vanished, and those sobs were not performative or tidy but ugly and uncontrolled, the kind that leave a person gasping for air, and viewers could not help but feel complicit in witnessing something so intimate, so raw, as though they were intruding on a mother's private grief, and as the investigation unfolded around her, with authorities speaking in cautious tones and loved ones offering words that felt hollow despite their good intentions, Steffi remained suspended in a painful limbo, because hope itself became a double-edged sword, something she clung to fiercely even as it threatened to destroy her every time a lead went cold, and the writing wisely allowed this contradiction to exist, showing how a mother can believe with absolute certainty that her child will be found while simultaneously bracing herself for the possibility that nothing will ever be the same again, and it was in this tension that the storyline found its deepest emotional resonance, because it refused to rush Steffi's pain or package it neatly for consumption, instead letting it linger in uncomfortable ways, forcing viewers to sit with the reality that some wounds do not heal quickly, if at all, and as Steffi interacted with those around her, the changes in her were unmistakable, her voice quieter, her eyes constantly scanning faces for clues, her patience worn thin by exhaustion and fear, and yet beneath that fragility burned an unmistakable resolve, a mother's instinct sharpened into something almost feral, because even as she unraveled she also hardened, driven by the singular need to bring her baby home, and Jacqueline MacInnes would capture this duality beautifully, portraying Steffi as both broken and unbreakable, a woman whose heart had been shattered but whose spirit refused to surrender, and this complexity elevated the storyline beyond mere melodrama, grounding it in emotional truth, and when Steffi finally confronted the reality that the kidnapping was not an accident or misunderstanding but a deliberate act, the betrayal cut deep, because it meant someone had invaded the most sacred part of her life with calculated intent, and that realization sparked a new wave of anguish, one tinged with anger and disbelief, as she grappled with the idea that evil could wear a familiar face, and the way Jacqueline MacInnes would allow that anger to surface, through clenched jaws, sharp breaths, eyes blazing with pain, added another layer to Steffi's grief, reminding viewers that sorrow is rarely pure, that it often intertwines with rage, confusion, and a desperate need for justice, and as days blurred together and exhaustion etched itself into every movement, Steffi's struggle became less about time and more about endurance, about surviving each hour without succumbing to despair, and the show did not shy away from depicting the physical toll of such trauma, from the hollowed cheeks to the tremor in her hands, reinforcing the idea that grief is not just emotional but deeply embodied, and fans responded with an outpouring of empathy, many sharing their own stories of fear and loss, praising the portrayal for its authenticity and restraint, because it resonated on a level far deeper than typical soap storylines. And as Steffi stood at the center of this unfolding tragedy, her relationships were irrevocably altered, because crisis has a way of revealing both the strength and fragility of human connections, and while some offered unwavering support, others faltered under the weight of her pain, unable to know what to say or how to help, leaving Steffi feeling isolated even in a room full of people, and this isolation was perhaps the most haunting aspect of the continuation, because it underscored the truth that grief can be profoundly lonely, that even surrounded by love, a mother searching for her stolen child walks a path no one else can fully understand, and Jacqueline MacInnes would convey this loneliness with heartbreaking subtlety, often saying more in silence than words ever could, her gaze distant, her body language closed off as though protecting what little remained intact, and yet, even in her darkest moments, there were flickers of hope, small, fragile sparks that refused to be extinguished, glimpses of Steffi imagining her baby's return, holding on to the belief that love could bridge even this unimaginable distance, and it was this hope, however tenuous, that kept her moving forward, that gave meaning to her suffering, and that ultimately defined the emotional core of the storyline, because at its heart this was not just a story about loss but about the fierce, unyielding bond between a mother and her child, a bond that persists even when tested by cruelty and fear, and as the continuation unfolded, it became clear that Steffi would never be the same woman she was before the kidnapping, because trauma reshapes identity, carving away illusions of safety and replacing them with a hard-earned awareness of vulnerability, and Jacqueline MacInnes would embrace this transformation fully, allowing Steffi's pain to leave visible marks, not just as temporary anguish but as something that would inform every choice she made moving forward, and this commitment to emotional continuity gave the storyline its weight, ensuring that the kidnapping was not reduced to a plot device but honored as a life-altering event, and as viewers remained on edge, waiting for answers, what lingered most powerfully was not the mystery itself but the image of Steffi standing resolute amid devastation, a mother broken by loss yet driven by love, embodying a truth that transcended fiction, that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, the human heart continues to fight for what it cannot bear to lose, making this continuation not merely an extension of shock and suspense but a profound exploration of grief, resilience, and the enduring strength of a mother's love. As the search for Steffi Forrester's stolen baby stretched into an agonizing new phase, the weight of uncertainty began to transform grief into something sharper and more volatile, a constant ache that pulsed beneath every thought, and Jacqueline MacInnes would continue to embody this evolution with breathtaking nuance, portraying a woman whose sorrow had hardened into relentless determination, because while tears still came, often unexpectedly, often in the quiet moments when Steffi believed no one was watching, they no longer defined her entirely, replaced instead by a fierce clarity of purpose that bordered on obsession, and this shift was both empowering and frightening to witness, as Steffi's maternal instinct sharpened into a singular focus that eclipsed everything else, including her own safety, her own well-being, and even her trust in those closest to her, because when a child is taken, the world becomes divided into only two categories, those who help and those who stand in the way, and Steffi could no longer afford hesitation or doubt, a truth reflected in the way her posture straightened even as her eyes remained haunted, in the way her voice steadied even when it trembled beneath the surface, and this transformation gave the storyline an entirely new emotional texture, shifting it from raw devastation into a tense, almost suffocating pursuit of answers, where every clue felt monumental and every setback felt like a personal betrayal by fate itself. And as Steffi began to actively retrace her steps, to question every interaction and scrutinize every memory, the past took on a sinister quality, ordinary moments recontextualized under the harsh light of hindsight, because the realization that the kidnapping had been carefully orchestrated meant that nothing could be taken at face value anymore, and Jacqueline MacInnes would capture this paranoia with chilling restraint, allowing it to surface not as hysteria but as quiet vigilance, a constant scanning of her environment, a subtle tightening of her jaw whenever someone spoke too confidently or offered reassurance too quickly, and this choice grounded the character's fear in realism, making it all the more unsettling, because it suggested that danger did not always announce itself loudly but often hid behind familiarity and charm, and as Steffi navigated this new reality, her relationships continued to fracture and reform under pressure, with some bonds strengthening through shared resolve and others splintering under the strain of blame and mistrust, and the writing did not shy away from these uncomfortable dynamics, allowing conflict to arise organically as loved ones struggled to support a woman whose pain had become all-consuming, and Steffi herself seemed painfully aware of this isolation, yet unwilling, or unable, to soften her edges, because compromise felt like a luxury she could no longer afford, and this emotional rigidity, while understandable, added another layer of tragedy to her journey, because it showed how trauma can simultaneously empower and alienate, turning survival into a lonely endeavor, and as nights passed without sleep and days blurred into one another, Steffi's body bore the unmistakable signs of prolonged anguish, her exhaustion etched into every movement, yet Jacqueline MacInnes would never allow this weariness to dull the character's intensity, instead using it to heighten the stakes, to underscore the idea that Steffi was operating on sheer will alone, driven by a love so fierce it defied physical limits, and viewers could feel this urgency in every scene, in the way Steffi clutched her phone as though it were a lifeline, in the way she reacted to each new development with a mixture of hope and dread so tightly intertwined they became indistinguishable, and when leads emerged, fragile, uncertain threads that promised possibility, Steffi's reaction was immediate and visceral, her breath catching, her eyes lighting up with a desperate spark that viewers knew all too well could be extinguished at any moment, and this emotional whiplash became a defining feature of the continuation, reflecting the cruel rhythm of real-life searches where progress is rarely linear and hope is constantly tested, and the show's willingness to dwell in this instability gave the storyline a haunting authenticity. Because it refused to offer easy victories or quick resolutions, instead honoring the emotional cost of every step forward and backward, and as Steffi confronted the reality that the kidnapper's motives might be deeply personal, the narrative took on an even darker tone, forcing her to grapple not just with loss but with the possibility that her own past choices had made her child a target, and this revelation reopened old wounds, dredging up guilt and regret that Steffi had long believed she had already faced and survived, and Jacqueline MacInnes would play these moments with devastating subtlety, allowing pain to flicker across her face as memories resurfaced. Not in dramatic monologues but in quiet, devastating pauses where words failed and only emotion remained, and these pauses spoke volumes, reminding viewers that trauma often resurrects itself in layers, each new crisis peeling back another scar, and as Steffi wrestled with these internal demons, the question of justice loomed large, because finding her baby was no longer enough, she needed accountability, needed to believe that the world could still be made right in some way, and this need fueled her resolve, pushing her into confrontations that crackled with tension and emotion, where fear and fury coexisted in equal measure, and Jacqueline MacInnes Wood's ability to convey this duality, this blend of vulnerability and ferocity, became the emotional backbone of the continuation, because it allowed Steffi to remain sympathetic even as her actions grew more extreme, more driven by instinct than reason, and this balance was crucial, preventing the storyline from slipping into caricature and instead anchoring it firmly in emotional truth. And as the community around Steffi reacted to the unfolding crisis, the ripple effects of the kidnapping became increasingly apparent, touching every corner of her life and reinforcing the idea that such a loss never exists in isolation, that it reverberates outward, altering relationships and reshaping priorities. And yet despite this collective impact, the narrative never lost sight of its core, Steffi's singular bond with her child, a bond so powerful it seemed to transcend physical separation, and this was most evident in the quiet moments when Steffi allowed herself to imagine her baby, to speak aloud as though her child could hear her, promising safety, promising love, promising that she would never stop searching, and these scenes, stripped of spectacle, became some of the most emotionally resonant, because they captured the essence of motherhood not as perfection but as unwavering presence, even in absence, and Jacqueline MacInnes would approach these moments with remarkable restraint, her voice soft, her expressions tender and aching, inviting viewers into a deeply private space that felt almost sacred, and as the continuation progressed, it became increasingly clear that the outcome of the kidnapping, whatever it might be, would not define Steffi's journey as much as the process itself, the way she navigated despair, hope, anger, and resilience in equal measure, because this ordeal was reshaping her identity, stripping away illusions and forcing her to confront the limits of control, and in doing so it revealed a strength that was quieter but more enduring than anything she had displayed before, a strength born not of confidence but of necessity, and fans responded to this evolution with profound emotional investment, praising the show for allowing the story to breathe and the actress for committing fully to the character's transformation, because it felt earned, honest, and deeply human, and as the tension continued to build, with unanswered questions hanging heavy in the air, what lingered most powerfully was the sense that Steffi was standing at the edge of a new chapter, one forged in pain but illuminated by love, and that regardless of how the mystery unfolded, she would emerge irrevocably changed, carrying the weight of this experience forward into every future choice, and this inevitability gave the continuation its haunting quality, because it reminded viewers that some stories do not end neatly, that some scars remain visible even after healing begins, and as Steffi pressed on, refusing to surrender to despair despite every reason to do so, her journey became emblematic of a universal truth, that in the face of unimaginable loss, love can become both a wound and a weapon, a source of unbearable pain and unyielding strength, and it was this truth, rendered with such emotional honesty and depth, that ensured the storyline would endure in the memories of viewers long after the final scene faded to black, not simply as a shocking twist or dramatic arc, but as a powerful exploration of motherhood, trauma, and the relentless human capacity to hope even when hope itself feels like the most dangerous thing of all.